Welcome to today's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagley, and this is the show where we break down what it takes to build elite strength, conditioning, and athleticism for the everyday athlete. In this week's episode, we're discussing one of the most common questions in strength training. How many sets and reps should you be doing to actually get stronger? I'm not talking 5x5 or 3x10. We're going to look at what the research says, how to adjust it for your goals, and when to start incorporating advanced methods like cluster sets, wave loading, and rest pause training. Whether you're training in a garage, coaching athletes, or just trying to squeeze more out of a 45-minute session, this episode is going to help you program with more precision and purpose. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Everyday Strength. I want to start today's episode with a question that I've been asked in some form or another, at least, probably once a week for years. And that is, how many sets and reps should I be doing to get stronger? And I get and I understand why people ask it. The gym can be an overwhelming place. There is more information available to you than ever. Some of that's good, some not so good. And figuring out how to structure your training doesn't really need a PhD, doesn't require a PhD in exercise science. So in this episode, I want to give you a clear, practical understanding of how to think through and how to think about sets, reps, and intensity. And then also discuss a few more of the advanced training techniques that can take your strength training to the next level. So whether you're training in a garage, on a sports team, or coaching others, I want to walk you through this and help you walk away with the confidence to program more effectively. So to start off, there's not one single magic rep scheme. Strength is built through tension and intensity and time, and layered in with intelligent progression over many months and many years. So let's first define a few terms. And the first one is volume. This is sets times reps times load. Intensity is the load relative to your 1 rep max. So whenever you think of your 1 rep max being 100%, relative intensity is 80% or 90% or 70%. Effort here can be measured through rating of perceived exertion, or RPE. We can also use other, some of these other terms like reps in reserve. And then frequency is how often you train a movement or a muscle group. Now, if you want to get stronger, then your training needs to stimulate the nervous system and the muscular system together. This is for strength. So you'll hear a lot of people talking about lifting in that 3 to 6 rep range at 80 to 90% of their max. Now, this creates an ideal balance of intensity and volume that allows you to target neural adaptations and create enough mechanical tension to form that adaptation. If you've ever seen Prilepin's chart, this is where that starts to fit in. So the Prilepin's chart was originally developed, for more like the Olympic lifter. And what it does, it provides a basic guideline on how many total reps you should be completing at various percentages of your max in order to develop strength. Prilepin's chart works really well because it gives us more of a research back range for how many reps we need to perform at different percentages of that 1 RM. And so an example here would be at 70% or 80%, you're aiming to do 3 to 6 sets. Aiming to do 3 to 6 reps per set, with around 18 to 24 total reps over the course of the workout. So 3 times 6, we get the picture. When you're lifting at 80 to 90%, now we're going to require fewer reps per set, but we're going to be able to get a lot more work done with fewer total reps in that total session. So here we're sticking to 2 to 4 reps per set, and we're aiming for a total of 12 to 20 reps in that session. And then once you're above 90%, here you're only doing 1 or 2 reps a set with about 7 to 10 reps total in that session. So the goal with this is to stay within that sweet spot. Get enough volume to drive adaptation, but not so much that your technique begins to break down or fatigue starts to become the limiting factor. And so This table, Prilepin's chart, gives you a target range, but as with anything, there's context and nuance that we must consider. And so you still need to adjust based on your training age, your level of fatigue, what phase of the block are you in, what phase of the season are you in, how close are you to failure. And that, we'll have to save that for another episode, but that brings us in here to reps in reserve. And so if you're doing 5 reps at 85%, but you're grinding to failure every single time, you're creating a lot more fatigue than what might be necessary. So whenever we're thinking and talking RIR, here we want to do most of our training with 1 to 2 reps still left in that tank. So now let's move past just doing 5x5 and let's actually think through this and teach this a little bit. So there's a number of set and rep schemes that truly do work. Some have their trade-offs. Each one really has their trade-offs. But I want to walk through a few examples that you'll almost always see in any program that you look through. The first one is 5x5. So 5 sets of 5 is one of the most time-tested strength templates out there. There's programs that are built around simply using 5x5. I can think of, like a lot of the starting strength work is built around this. 5-3-1 is built around this. So with 5x5, you're working at 75-85% of your 1 rep max, which is heavy enough to stimulate strength, but it's still repeatable. And then we're resting 3 to 5 minutes between sets. Now this is great, and it works because, it helps to build a foundation, especially if you're newer to structured strength work. But if you're a little bit stronger, then you need to just be aware and watch out for excess fatigue, because 5 hard sets can add up quickly when you're getting that much work in. Second scheme is 3 sets of 3 or 5 sets of 3. And this is where we really start to lean more into that intensity. So here we'll typically be lifting between 85 to 92% of max. Reps are a little bit lower. Rest is a little bit higher. So here we want to think, 2 to 5 minutes between sets, because here we're training the nervous system a little bit more. Now, 3x3, 5x3, these are great for peaking phases, testing, sharpening bar speed. It's not as ideal for long-term progress on its own. The volume ultimately just isn't high enough when we're only doing 9 or 15 sets here. And then we're looking at 4x6 or 5x6. So 4 sets of 5, 4 or 5 sets of 6 hits the middle ground, and it allows for enough reps to build volume, but it still is heavy enough to drive strength up. Here we'll be working around 70 to 80% of your max, resting 90 seconds to 2 minutes between sets. And this works well because in a general strength phase, when you're trying, to basically add, and increase that volume, you can do so while reinforcing good movement patterns with slightly lighter loads. And then that brings us to 3x8 or 4x10. Now, these are higher rep ranges, and they push more towards hypertrophy and structural balance. And so here you're going to have to work at a lower percentage, around 60 to 75% of your max, using moderate weights with shorter rest. We can do 60 to 90 seconds between those sets. And this is ideal for more of accessory work and early off-season work, or when you're just trying to build a lot of tissue and a lot of tissue resilience. Not really when you're trying to get stronger, build, test and chase a new 1 rep max. So ultimately, it's not about one being better, but it's about choosing the right structure for your goal, and it's about managing fatigue. So we always talk about recovery. It all comes back to, can you recover from it, especially for the everyday athlete? What's the point of getting stronger if we're always tired? So volume without enough intensity isn't going to be enough of a stimulus to drive strength. And then vice versa, intensity without enough volume or recovery is ultimately a fast track to overtraining. So now that we've covered a few of the more popular strength building schemes and when to use them, let's bring it back to the core question, purpose of this episode. So how many sets and reps do you actually need to build strength? Now, a solid baseline is 3 to 6 reps per set, and then 3 to 6 working sets per lift, with a total of 10 to 25 reps per week above 80% of your 1 rep max. Now, that can be broken down by 5 sets of 5 at 80%, 4 sets of 4 at 85%, or 6 sets of 2 at 90%. All are effective options, so long as you're hitting that target range and resting enough, 2 to 4 minutes between sets, and then ultimately progressing, adding weight over time. You will get stronger doing just that. Now, let's get into a bit of the fun stuff. And I want to talk about more advanced methods that we can use. And these are not just for elite athletes, but they're, ultimately for anyone who's a little bit more advanced, can certainly benefit from these because they allow for a little bit more of a strategic way to drive adaptation. And so I'm going to break down, what do we have here, for like 4 different advanced methods. And we're going to go through each one at a time. So first off, let's go into cluster sets. So cluster sets, in my mind, are one of the most effective ways to build strength without that excessive fatigue. If you're not familiar with the cluster set, a cluster set breaks down one single set into smaller chunks with short rest periods between each rep or each reps. So basically, instead of doing 3 reps in a row, you might do 1 rep, rest 20 seconds, get back under the bar, do a second rep, rest 20 seconds, get back under the bar, and do another rep. So we're still getting 3 reps, but now we can maintain bar speed a bit more. We can make sure that our technique is clean and we can lift a lot heavier without accumulating a lot of fatigue. So they're especially useful during more of an intensification phase, and especially on like big lifts. Think the squat, the clean, the deadlift. These are used all the time in powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting as well. So any movement really where quality matters more than just grinding out extra reps. And there's a lot of evidence to actually support this, basically showing that cluster sets can help to preserve force and power output across multiple sets, especially whenever you are fatigued. And so I use these with more of my intermediate or advanced lifters. I use this in the peak performance programs because they're a little bit more advanced. And folks here want to push that intensity, but not get super, fatigued, they can recover from it. And they also prioritize precision. And so when we're thinking clusters, we can do 3 to 5 sets, 85 to 90% of your max, resting 15 to 20 seconds between the reps, and then resting 3 to 4 minutes between clusters. So smart, heavy training without sloppy reps. That is what cluster training gets you. Second method is wave loading. I love wave loading. I love all these. That's why I'm talking about them, right? But I love wave loading because it allows you to build strength and confidence under heavier loads. So wave loading allows you to ramp up the intensity across sets. So we can do 3 reps at 80%. We can do 2 reps at 85%. And then we can do 1 single rep at 90. And then we can repeat that wave, only this time go a bit higher. So we can do 3 reps at 82%, and then 2 reps at 87, and then 1 at 92. So this basically allows you to prime the nervous system to handle that progressively heavier load, but you're going to feel it, basically it's going to feel a little bit lighter. You're going to have less perceived effort. Now, these are especially useful in like a late accumulation or an early peaking phase, or even when you want to train near max without hitting a true max. I've actually used wave loading to test maxes before because it basically allows the athlete to still test well and not even really know that they're testing. Again, wave loading works great on the main lifts. So your squat, your bench, your deadlift, your cleans, and they can be used 1 to 2 times a week during a strength emphasis block. Here, for most athletes, 2 to 3 total waves is plenty. So using that 80, 85, 90, and then 82, 87, 92 example like that, that's going to give you a lot of stimulus. We're getting enough volume in there to push adaptation. And that's plenty to drive that. Here we want to keep rest a little bit longer. So 3 to 5 minutes between sets. And this is a simple structure that can yield some serious results for you. Now, the third method is rest pause sets. These are another great tool for squeezing more high quality reps into one single working set. And so here's how they work. Basically, you do a near max effort set. So like 5 reps at 85%, and then you rest 20 seconds, and then you do 2 more, and then you rest again, and you try to get 1 final rep. Now, these give you more exposure to those high effort reps without fully resting in between sets. And this also increases motor unit recruitment and pushes you through those fatigue thresholds, which are great for strength and endurance or later in a hypertrophy block. These, on the other hand, can also work really well with more of your accessory work. And so thinking, we can do this with lat pull downs. We can do this with cable rows. They work really, really well to just squeeze a bit more out. And they also work well when you're short on time, but still want to try to get that intensity, because we can do more work in that one single set. Ultimately here, though, we want to make sure that we're still maintaining good technique and that we're using proper load selection, because those are, we've got to make sure that we've earned the right to basically use this. And so we're not doing junk reps to just squeeze out a few more. We're still using good technique. We're still using good form. Now, I'll use, I've already given you a couple examples, but I'll use rest pauses on dumbbell presses, leg presses, a lot of body weight movements. We can do it on the barbell lifts, but I don't do it often because, there we want to really make sure that we're monitoring fatigue when we're doing so. Now, rest pauses can basically replace 2 or 3 straight sets. So we can do, basically 2 sets of rest pauses instead of 4 sets, or 2 sets instead of 3. So that's where that time factor comes into play. And the last one is overwarm singles. Now, these are simple, but they're truly powerful. Basically, here what we're doing is before you hit your main working set, you take a heavy single, around 90 to 93% of your max. The goal is not to PR here. This is not, max out day, but it's basically to prime your nervous system. And that one heavy single allows you to activate more motor units and build that confidence underneath the bar, which then makes your back off sets feel a little bit lighter. This is used all the time in powerlifting. Basically, it's a form of post-activation potentiation. So you can use them before top set of 5, 4s, even wave loading blocks. But the key here is to treat it like a rehearsal. So we still want to stay sharp. We want to be fast. We want to be technical. We want to have good form when we're going into it. And again, they're useful and ideal for more of that immediate to advanced lifter who already knows how to move heavy loads regularly. We want to keep it to one single, rest 3-4 minutes, and then we can dive into the working sets. All right, so now let's put all of that into context. We've got the principles, we've got some different methods and some different tools that we can use, but how do we actually organize them into a week of training? So here are a few ways that I apply this in training blocks in all my programs. Option 1 is a base strength block. Here we can do primary lift of 4 or 5 sets of 4 to 6 reps at 80 to 87%. Our accessory lifts, we can do 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 10 reps, resting 2 to 3 minutes between the main lifts, and then 60 seconds or 90 seconds between the accessories. And the goal here is to build capacity with heavy yet sustainable loads. This is your bread and butter. If you're not sure where to start, this is the spot. This is that base strength. Option number 2 is a cluster set focus. So primary lift here, we'll do 3 cluster sets of 3 reps. So you'll see this programmed as 3 times 1 plus 1 plus 1 at 85 to 90%. We're going to rest 15 to 20 seconds between reps, and then we're going to rest 3 minutes between the full sets. Now, accessory work, we will not use clusters, but we will back down. We'll use lower volume, but higher intent. And the goal during this is to maintain bar speed on those main lifts and maintain quality while we're fatigued. So these are perfect, like I said, during intensification phases or whenever we're trying to develop both strength and power during that block. And then option number 3 is a wave loading block. So here we can do a primary lift during week 1. We can do 3, 2, 1 at 80, 85, and 90. We can do week 2, 3, 2, 1, 82, 87, 92. Week 3, 3, 2, 1, 85, 90, and 95. And then week 4, we can auto-regulate or add in a deload. So here, the goal is to progressively build to that near max effort without accumulating too much excess fatigue. Now, these are especially helpful, for the athletes that are coming up to a test week or a competition scenario, because it allows us to work on and feeling that higher load. How often now should you rotate methods? If you're progressing, then you don't need to change anything. But in general, I like to rotate these every 3 to 5 weeks. Usually my blocks are 3 or 4 weeks long. With the 3 week, I don't really use a lot of deloads, but with 4 weeks, we're doing a structured deload every 4 weeks. But whenever I program with 3 weeks, and this will be a topic for another episode, but whenever I program with 3 weeks, basically first week is to learn the new movements, get familiar with them. And then the second week is to start to load it a little bit. We know how it feels. Now let's put a little bit of weight in the bar. And then week 3 is where we're using kind of our heaviest weights or the most volume. And then we start a new block. Whenever we go 4-week blocks, now we're essentially using a very similar method, but we're going to have more of a structured deload built in on that 4th week. 3 to 5 weeks using these primary methods allows your nervous system to get that adaptation, but the movements stay fresh. You don't get stale. It gives you time to track trends in your load progression without constantly switching gears, constantly switching programs, which is a huge, huge problem that I've talked about ad nauseum. Now, let's finish off with a few misapplications, a few patterns that I see a lot and how we can avoid those. And so, the first one is using these advanced methods too early. I talk to the everyday athlete. I talk to those that are generally a little bit more advanced. So clusters, wave loading, and rest pause training are not magical, but they are multipliers, and they work better, and they work when your movement is efficient and your recovery is managed, and you've already progressed through a lot of the foundational loading strategies. If you're struggling with bar path, if you're struggling with bracing under the bar during a squat, if you're struggling with getting into the gym consistently, then the answer is not going to be, let's try these advanced methods. Let's make things more complex. It's going to be, let's get more consistent. Let's learn how to move. It's getting more reps with better focus. So, don't start out. If you're listening to this and you're thinking about starting exercise, don't, week 1, hop in there and start doing clusters. Number 2 is confusing fatigue with progress. If every workout you're doing ends with you wrecked, if you're sore for the next 7 days, you're probably training hard and you're not training smart. Yes, soreness means that it works, but if you're consistently sore, then we got a bigger problem here. So strength training needs intensity. It also needs quality reps. It needs rest between sets, rest between sessions, and enough recovery to allow you to adapt. This is where auto-regulation matters. So if bar speed is dropping week after week, if your last set is a grind, if you're still sore 72, hours later, days later, weeks later, then you've probably pushed past that effective dose, which I've talked about this, I view exercise as medicine, and we're applying a stimulus. And if we take too much, Tylenol, right? If we take too much, it can kill us now. So think about it through that lens. The number 3 is mismanaging your load and effort. So just because a program says to do 85% doesn't mean that you have to do 85% or you will die, right? This is where RIR come into play, reps in reserve. This is where RPE come into play. I've talked about it before, and we will do a podcast on this eventually, but talking about auto-regulating on the day, auto-regulating in the rack. How can we do so? So just because it says 85%, maybe we didn't sleep well the night before. Maybe we, I'm building a playhouse right now, and maybe we're just sore from doing manual labor that I can't get into the gym and hit what I was supposed to hit. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do that session, but it just means we might have to scale back a little bit so we can dial in effort relative to how you're performing that day. And if your 85% is feeling like a max, then maybe it's not the right day for you to be doing those heavy clusters, those heavy singles. We can always come back, okay? Just because we miss one session, it's not the end of the world. And then number 4 is ignoring the role of assistance work. So your sets and your reps on the big lifts, yes, they matter, but so does everything else that surrounds them. Louis Simmons, would talk about all the time, yes, we would squat, but then they would do a ton of high volume assistance work. And they would often do at Westside Barbell, right? They would do 2 sessions in a day. They would come back later and knock out some reverse hypers. They would knock out some hamstring curls. They would drag the sled. Assistance work is what helps to build up those big lifts. And so if you're wanting stronger squats, if you want to be better under the bar, then it's not just squatting heavy, but we need to strengthen everything else that surrounds that. We need to strengthen the quads, the hamstrings, the glutes, the low back, upper back, everything. We need to make sure that we're intentionally focusing on building those up. So think of the big lift as more of like that main event, whereas everything else on your training card is part of the support crew that helps it grow. And so let's wrap up with a few takeaways, just to kind of summarize the episode here. Ultimately, there is no single, I know this was the point of the podcast, but there's no one single best rep scheme. We know how many reps are needed, but how do we get there? There's a number of different ways. I've laid out for you 6 different ways that we can get there. And I've even laid out some methods, but your set and rep choices should reflect your goal. What phase are you in? How ready are you? Okay. Use Prilipin's chart. Use reps in reserve. Use those as frameworks to guide your decisions and not rules to blindly follow. Okay. Let's use methods like cluster sets and wave loading and rest pause work and apply them at the right time in the right phase for the right lifter. And then make sure that we're rotating with intention by tracking progress and giving the block time, some space to work before we just switch things up because we think, 2 weeks in, this isn't working for me. Okay. So if you're looking for a structured way that you can implement this approach, my Peak Performance and the Peak 3X program that are available in Train Heroic, I build this in there. Okay. So you'll see throughout the year, these different methods layered across training blocks. Everything has a clear focus on progression, recovery, and performance. And I make sure that I apply what I preach to how I program. So thank you for listening to Everyday Strength. If this episode helped clarify something in your own training or your coaching, please consider sharing it. Share it with a friend, share it with your training partner. And if you want to see exactly how I work these into a program, then make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, to the newsletter. Follow me on Instagram and YouTube at Hagley Strength. And each week I break these down in more detail along with a host of other training and programming insights. So I want to thank you for listening. And as always, train hard and train smart. That's it for today's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. If you got value from this, do me a favor, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who would benefit. And if you want more insights, exclusive training tips, and in-depth breakdowns of the latest research in strength conditioning, join my Performance Edge newsletter. It's my free weekly email where I cut through the noise and break down what actually works in training, nutrition, and performance. Sign up today at hagleystrength.com. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you next time.